So the most important thing about, should we start now? We're good? All right. So the most important thing about this particular slide is I am not an identity management expert. Think of me as the guy that's on the other side of that, consuming all the identity stuff that everybody else here builds, creates, designs. I'm that guy, as well as my teams. It is one of those things where, as I went through my career, I didn't even know this space existed. It was just kind of one of those things. I'm building software all my life. I'm building identity solutions. I'm building, user management systems, authentication things for everything. But, you're just naive. You don't know. You're just building it. And next thing you know, I get invited to a conference, a few years ago. I'm like, oh, shit, there's a whole bunch of people here that know this stuff a hell of a lot better than me. So the first thing we start off is just going a little bit over what we do as an organization and why we actually needed this in the first place. I'm not sure who is familiar with Live Nation. A lot of people aren't familiar with Nation, but a lot of people are familiar with Ticketmaster, and that's the ticketing portion of that business, and that's the one that I'm part of. So on here, we're talking about the 1.4 billion part ticketing. And then as part of that, we have a couple different spaces. We have our clients. So thousands of clients are places like venues, arenas, stadiums that are Madison Square Garden, for instance, the Knicks. I want to have a basketball game. Well, I need to organize that. I need to create that event. I need to organize the seats. I need to price those seats. And they have thousands of users, tens of thousands of users. And then we have our customers, right? So all the different sales channels, whether it's Live Nation, TicketWeb, Tickets Now, a lot of the resale, primary markets, the mobile apps, ticket outlets, such as the box office themselves in those stores, as well as calling up on the telephone. But then we said, hey, we need to do something. This is like about 3 years ago. We wanted to kind of change our business, not necessarily from a business model perspective, but our technology. Did a lot of mergers and acquisitions. We have 17 different ticketing platforms throughout the globe, and it's just really, really difficult to sustain and maintain that. A lot of technology, as you notice here, there's assembly programs written on that are running on a VAX emulator. So when you buy a ticket on Ticketmaster, there's a good chance that you're actually going against a system that was written in 1985, and it's still operating today, it's still working, it's still servicing those tickets, but what happens is it's this big application, and there's like 2 people in the company that actually know how it works. Trying to find someone that can actually program for this thing is near impossible. So this is a problem. Not only that, again, we've acquired tons of companies, so we come out with one great new feature. Well, guess what? There's 16 other environments that don't have that, right? So we have to redo that 17 times, and we have long delivery cycles. We're talking 9 months to get a new feature out. So this whole re-architecture was consolidate experience, do a little up level on our technology, get a new architecture, and get into like a constantly building, constantly getting stuff out there mode. So, but why are we doing this? Okay, we want to increase business agility. That's what we're talking about in terms of how do I get everything out today, tomorrow, not 9 months, as well as kind of reduce the number of people supporting the thing and get more people building stuff. This is important when it comes to the identity piece because right now, well, not right now, but currently, a few months ago, we're very much hey, you want to support, you call us. So we have a huge support organization that's dealing with all of our clients' customers, right? They sold a ticket at Madison Square Garden for a Knicks ticket. Well, guess what? Who are they going to call when they need help? They're going to call us. That's a big burden on our organization, so we want to get rid of that. I talk fast, so raise your hand if it's just like cranking through and you want me to go slow down. But so what are some requirements? We have multiple tenants. We have about 5,000 clients, so each one of them is actually viewed as a different business within our organization. They have their own data. They have their own users. Within their users, they have their own sort of authorizations that they can do within the various programs that they develop as well as what we develop. And they have a bunch of different applications that they support, whether that's web, mobile, scanners, they want to scan that ticket in, mobile devices, and mobile experiences that they want to encourage, roles, entitlements, and user management. And again, the big part here is delegate administration, making sure that we're not part of that loop. Push it onto them. You do it. It's your customer. We want no part of that. And it also just speeds up the time that the customer will actually get help. It's more relevant. On the B2C side, again, multiple tenants. We have multiple channels. That could be our channels as Live Nation. We have TicketWeb, Tickets Now, Ticketmaster. But it could easily enable other places like Madison Square and to launch up their own sales platforms, right? They already do with their own box office tools, but they can actually go to a consumer experience and say, hey, look, I'm Broadway.com, right? I'm using this backend platform, so I have a concept of tools, but how do I do that? How do I get my own delivery timelines on that? So think of us more like moving to more of a white label service and making sure the identity protects their data. We have a big issue with like fraud, and we have a big issue with bots. We have, you know, I don't know if you've ever tried to buy a ticket and couldn't. So there's a bunch of bots out there that are buying your tickets that you wanted for that great event, and they got the better seats. And part of our job is to say, hey, how do we detect those things, and how do we get rid of those guys? And user self-service, which is pretty normal. Some challenges. The big one on the B2C side, I'll jump forward, is this basically, I'm not sure if you're familiar with our traffic patterns, but it's a little different than a lot of sites. You know, usually there's the typical sales spikes during the day. Ours are, it's 10 a.m. in the morning. That's when Lady Gaga, the Eagles, Fish, and 9 other concerts go on sale. There's 40,000 seats, and 10 million people want to use that seat. Boom. Our traffic spike goes nothing through the roof. 2 minutes later, it's down flat again. So we get this weird traffic pattern where it's usually 7 a.m., 8 a.m., 9 a.m., 10 a.m. So it almost looks like a denial of service attack every single time. So how do we deal with that, and how do we scale for that? And kind of like we talked about the last conversation we just had, was we have a big legacy issue. We have 17 different systems. We want to consolidate that. How do we integrate all existing applications with that, and how do we migrate all that data with it? It's just a pain. Okay, so this is our solution. The point of this is that what we did is we created an API that abstracts those legacy systems, right? And a big thing of this is, again, going back to that I am not an identity expert. You're going through and you're learning as you go, and you start going to things and seeing things like, hey, there's this SCIM thing. Oh, great, I just reinvented a wheel yet again. I wish I knew about this stuff, and this is what's great about going to these kind of conferences for me as the other side of that. You already know it. Well, maybe not all of you, but most of you, I guess. But I don't know it. So I go to these conferences and I'm like, oh, wow, I really wish I knew that 2 years ago, or I wish I knew that 3 months ago, because it really would have changed what I do. But a simplified version is I have at the top here a bunch of different consuming applications. Whether they're legacy or new, I go through the effort of basically getting them onto a common API. Now, I can't deal with the migration yet, so what I do is I say, hey, let me route to a number of different providers to make sure that I can go and authenticate and authorize against the source, the identity provider which was originally there. Then we have this kind of yet another provider, which doesn't really have like a solid source, which then can bridge legacy providers with a new provider to kind of facilitate that lazy migration over there. I mean, we do bulk migrations as well, but we want to kind of, hey, how do I deal with passwords? How do I make sure I don't ever have to move a password myself? Let me make the customer move it so I never have to see it, things like that. I always look at it this way. I'm a consumer of this stuff too. I never want anybody to see my password. I never want anybody to see information. So how do I facilitate that way lazily, where when I enter my password, it goes over? But we also employ what we call what's called the stringler pattern, which is how do I get new features into this without having to update an old one? So we see like a lot of these things like session management. We've built on top of this bridge a session manager to deal with that for some of these legacy systems that don't do session management. Okay, so we did that. We built this abstract layer, this API, if you will, right? And for most organizations, it's like sitting there in our own organization, but we're like, hey, wait a second. What we really want to do is we want to enable our clients to do whatever they want. So we want to bring it to the cloud. We say, okay, we have this IBS system, does all these things. And then we go, okay, well, we can use it to protect itself, kind of, like I said, eat our own dog food and make sure that to prove within our own space that are we actually doing the right things to protect our own assets, which includes our own APIs as well as our own web user interfaces. So I put it out there, boom, and we have our different clients. In this case, I'm using examples of our own internal clients of Live Nation for our concerts division, but it could be anywhere like Madison Square Garden, for instance, or Staples Center could actually bring this in and be part of that. So each one of these venues treats themselves like a separate independent business unit and organization, which has their own processes, policies, user base, and data. Something interesting that happened as part of the merger with Live Nation and Ticketmaster was the DOJ actually put this thing called the data firewall because we represented potentially a vertical monopoly. We aren't, but that's a danger that we threaten. So we as ticketing, with relations to our concert division, could say, hey, look, if I see your data, maybe I might price things differently. Maybe I will give ourselves a distinct advantage over our other competitors if we share that data. So even within our organization, even though each one of these is Verizon, House of Blues, and the Fillmore, even though they're our assets, they are not allowed to see each other's data. So that's why we kind of treat them as a separate tenant altogether. And that's the best way to do it, is because even if we were to say, okay, it's a different subset of data, when someone comes in and audit us, we want to be the highest level of thing, kind of like you're doing your PCI compliance. You just say, hey, let's in that other SOC. There's no one can get into that one guy. That's the same thing we want to do here, is when the DOJ comes in and audits us, we want to say, hey, look, there's no way they can get that data because this is the way we segmented our information. They're completely a different tenant. It's different. It's independent. And there you go. So we're able to do this. But then we look at our other clients, right? Not us. And what we do is we see our small clients that have like 5 employees, no tech background. They're, they have a venue that they sell tickets to, and that's all they really care about, right? At the end of the day, they're just going to use, I'll get to this in a second. And then we have our big clients. And our big clients are, say, Madison Square Garden. It has thousands of employees. They have their own IT. They have their own tech shop, their own software development, probably. And they have their own identity solutions as well. Versus the small shops, they don't even know what identity is. They're like, oh, I can log into Google. That's about it. So, but they have the same core needs, right? They still want to create events, sell events, report on those events, log in, remove access. So what we do is say, hey, look, use a small client. What we do is we build a bunch of cloud services, not only APIs, but also web APIs, web services on top of that, or web applications on top of that, that you can use and say, you don't have to think about this. You go to work, you log in, you scan your tickets, you create your events, you price your events, you sell your events, you're good to go, right? Then you have your big clients that are going to say, hey, look, you know what? I want different options. And this is what I kind of say. Some will go, hey, look, I don't want to do anything. So they go into swivel chair mode. It's like, I'll use my one app, I'll log into that one, I'll swivel over, I'll log into this one, do the same thing. But some go, hey, look, we're a mature organization. When I onboard someone, I want the HR to hit that button. And when they hit that button, it's going to go and provision those applications, those remote applications that you're supplying to us, the right access for that. So that's where those APIs come in, that IBS layer in the cloud. It says, hey, look, you can use your own infrastructure, but we can still value add by saying, when you hit that button, all those capabilities are now available to you. And it's levels of degree with that they can do is that they can kind of a la carte, if you will, right? Say, I don't want to develop the new event management system on my side, I want to use yours, but my user provisioning, I do want to integrate and make sure that I can provision users as I hit the button for HR. All right. So just a quick little thing in terms of this is what our permissioning UI looks like for the most part. It's log in, this is your org. Some people can actually have hierarchies of org, so if there's administrators that have multiple, they can go in and actually select the ones they want to administer. Each one of those have a set of users that they can actually administer and actually assign applications and roles and with their active state, lock them, unlock them should they get out there. We can create new organizations. You can look at the organizations there. There's certain attributes that can assign to organizations that may be part of an entitlement, if you will. So like more of an ABAC model. So that's the basics. All right, now my wall of text. I went through that way too fast, by the way. So you have lots of time for questions. So issues exist on mobile. So this is an interesting area that we're actually coming here, and I'm hoping Brian maybe learned something in the last session, that we struggle with, and we see it a lot, especially in our consumer space, but it can also happen in our business space as well, where we have, this is a real problem that we experience where people go and they decompile our applications, our mobile applications. They decompile them. They build a farm of stuff where they can take that cert. It's still the public cert, it's still the API key. They're able to reproduce a thing and start just hammering our system and buying stuff. What's interesting is like for a lot of companies, they would love that. They'd be like, hey, shit, buy things from me all day long. Buy as much as you can, all you can. But we have this problem where our consumer hates that because all it does is feed this gray market, this black market economy, where it's like, hey, look, yes, I just bought your, which was probably a $500 ticket for $25, and I bought them all 2 seconds between because I built out a farm to buy them all, right? You think that, hey, they're sold, but again, the artists, they hate it, we hate it, the government hates it. So our job is to figure out how do we limit that? How do we keep them from attacking us on this route? So kind of what we look at is this kind of multi-factor auth as well as a session-based auth where we can't use these durable tokens, these certs that just sit there on the machine that can be hacked. We have to say, look, give me a session ID. On each request, give me back a new one, right? And it's probably something that's very familiar in terms of just normal web stuff. How do we protect session hijacking? And that's all it is. So it's probably stuff you already know, but that's what we're doing to kind of say, how do we limit our applications from being exploited in that way? All right, B2B versus B2C, it's the same thing. It really is. Especially when it comes to these cloud things, because what we do is we have an identity management solution that's in the cloud that create users, update users, add passwords, add authentication mechanisms. But our key difference is that scaling, right? When I go back, our B2B is flat, throughout the day. Our B2C has these spikes. So we decided to say, hey, look, just for the purpose of this exercise, we don't want one world to hurt the other. We're going to actually have two separate physical deployments, even though they're logically very similar. And that's it. Told you went fast.
Thank you very much.
But I can dive into any of these subjects because I didn't know where you guys wanted to go with this. So yeah.
Could you elaborate on the data store?
Yeah. So for what we call, so as you said, there's a lot of legacy providers, and the legacy providers have n number of different stores, right? What we decided with the data store for the new provider is basically just using Oracle, Oracle RDBMS. So there's nothing special about it. We're actually not treating it as like Active Directory LDAP. We're saying, hey, look, it's a relational data store that has this data in it. We do enrich it with some other, Brian, what do we do for like the other attributes that we do? We still just in Oracle right now? Yeah. We might go into something like a document-based store for the extended attributes that you might want to just continually like update so we don't have to worry about any sort of schema-related items. But the core attributes, the core data store for our new provider is just an Oracle RDBMS.
Every new tenant is a new user schema?
No. No, it's actually within the same data store, same schema, same everything. So that's when we talk about extending it from the extended attributes in terms of going into a document store, is basically going to a schemaless design. So there's what we do is we identify from our perspective, there's a core set of attributes that are part of every identity. Right. Username, password, profile information, address. There's a sort. You may not have to use them all, but we define, like I said, a basic set of here's what an identity looks like, here's what a profile looks like, and we can extend those gradually. But that's what a core is. If there's additional attributes that you need for like an entitlement perspective or from it, then what happens is like the role as an entity that exists as part of that relational data store, entitlement exists as store, but those additional attributes, that's when we put into like a schemaless thing, and you can add a number of attributes you want.
I guess to clarify, how does siloing apply to Oracle, or how does Oracle support siloing?
So in this case, it's a virtual siloing, right? Now we do have our driver does support partitioning, so that we can actually inject a driver that actually says, hey, look, based on this client, actually use a separate data store. But for the most part, from our perspective, that data store is so far away from what the consumer actually sees of our services that they don't know and they don't care. Right? So we have a data store which, from our perspective, on tech perspective, yes, it's one big Oracle database that can hold all those users and all those organizations and all those domains from anywhere around the world. But from their perspective, it's kind of locked down into one thing. However, if we do have a scaling issue from a big data perspective at any time, again, all we do is we can partition on any sort of attributes within that data set. And primarily we would actually partition on is the tenant ID, if you will. And so we can actually partition tenants to any level at that point. And if we ever had a security issue, we can actually protect it on an individual tenant basis.
How you doing? When you were looking at the two options for the handle solution, both concurrently or the two physical solutions, when you did the cost analysis on that type of deployment option, was there anything that kind of stood out as surprising?
The cost issue wasn't like, preferably from a cost perspective, like we would actually rather have just said, hey, look, let's just go with the B2C scaling because we have to do that anyways. And the B2B one is such a smaller like segment of that it would handle the B2B portion of that. The cost was more on the risk of what happens when one of those spaces gets compromised or what happens when spaces gets hit with a certain load. Like there are certain times when our scaling is not as effective on the consumer side, and we don't want to impact our clients at that time. So it's kind of one of those things where no matter what happens on one side, we didn't want to impact the fans. If it was, so a fan impact would impact our clients, and clients would impact our fans. That was really what it really boiled down to.
And also, I guess, factoring into that, the operational model of support behind each one is two different support organizations.
Well, we're in a DevOps mode right now, so it is only because it's two different dev teams. But
Tier 3 support,
but yes,
outage support are
yes.
two entirely separate silos?
Yeah. And that's why we want to converge them. We want to put them together, and we think we can. It's just we're kind of scared. We're like, okay, what happens when this one, like putting all our eggs in one basket, right? What's nice is that from a technology perspective, one is derived from the other, so we've converged somewhat, but we're still not, I have it basically on my roadmap to really explore that option of saying, hey, look, can we converge these and can we put them together? Right now, I'm still like tippy-toeing around that. So, because long-term cost savings, I think it would be better to merge them, especially even from a feature perspective. We're worried about like one deployment getting out of date with another deployment, and then so when there's a bug in one, like does that mean I have to branch off of that old tag and then update it? Versus if I knew they're the same deployment, I can go, oh, fine, there's a bug, I fix it for both of them, I'm good, I'm done, right? They're always on the same feature set and everything like that, so we're good.
Thank you.
Right.
Yes. That's lives.
How do you deal with like if you have duplicate identities that are spread across multiple tenants? Like, I mean, from a user's perspective, do I have the same identity, or is it like my identity in each tenant is different?
So right now, and then correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, but right now it's a unique identity per tenant. So right now if I'm like K Riggio at Yahoo.com or Ken Riggio at livenation.com, I'm always confused because we have different configurations, one for B2C, one for B2B. Because in B2C, we definitely allow each tenant to have duplicate identities. So if my identity is ken.riggio at livenation.com, I can exist in multiple tenants, and it's completely separate, different profiles, completely isolated. On B2B, I think we configured it as it's unique across all tenants, but I'm not positive. That's right now. And that was a business decision right now. Technically, it's basically a configuration that we can switch. So
Okay.
I'm not a big, it's a debate. It's something that internally we debate a lot. And that's why on the B2C side, we know that's what we wanted, that it's distinct across all. But it was like one of those things is like, well, we can talk afterwards about the details. But
Cool, thank you.
Anyone else? Questions? Aha.
So do you have the business requirement or use case where your customers require single sign-on across your properties? Because you just talked about the ability to have unique login per domain, per tenant, I mean. But so is there a scenario where you're trying to get to the ability to do single sign-on across all of your different properties, or is that a desired use case, or is that something you enable today?
It definitely is. And so that's kind of like there's a few different capabilities that we're kind of doing here. One, we have this as a whole separate piece of this. We actually have the whole the single sign-on kind of thing with federated identity, as well as account linking across multiple tenants. But that's why there's this kind of weird kind of, when he asked the question of, hey, I want to log, is the identity unique across all tenants or within each tenant? That was one route where they said, hey, look, since all of our tenants happen to be our clients, we want to be able to log in and go to any given tenant that they have, that they are authorized to access to, right? So that was kind of like, it's sort of a single sign-on, but we're really cheating since it's actually the same identity store, right? But then in the consumer space, we're saying, hey, look, it's actually truly distinct, and each one is unique. So we need some way of actually providing single sign-on across, say, TicketWeb and Ticketmaster and Live Nation, even though they want their own identity stores, so that as they navigate through, an example is when I go to Ticketmaster, I'm going to do a search. And that search may be for, say, it's my favorite band, Opeth. And Opeth is playing a club. Ticketmaster primarily deals with amphitheaters and larger venues, and TicketWeb is dealing with more of the club environment. It's going to redirect me to TicketWeb. Right now, we have the problem of, hey, when I go there, I have to re-log in. Why? It's the same company. I mean, even if it wasn't the same company, why are we doing this? So that is a big desire to say, when I hit that button of go to TicketWeb, it should be single sign-on. Once I link those accounts, like, you should be able to go, get in there, see that this is your profile for TicketWeb, buy a ticket right then without having to log in, fewer clicks. It is definitely a requirement. We are building that we have the capability for TicketWeb, I mean, for the B2C right now. We haven't enabled it to our consumers yet. It's on our roadmap to enable, even though the technology is there already. Did that answer the question? All right. What, I got like 1 minute? No, I'm done.
You're pretty close. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Ken.